two friends taking pictures of the rising full moon on a summer night.
Two teenage kids doing what teenage kids do.
When a stranger with a gun and a death wish changed everything.
It was violent, it was senseless, and I will never understand it, I will never accept it.
I'm Amy Donaldson, and unfortunately, we're all too familiar with stories about how violence shatters lives. But what we rarely see is how they are rebuilt. In a new podcast, The Letter, we relive tragedy, but only so we can hear the rest of the story. The struggle to reclaim lives, the realities of grief, and the possibilities of forgiveness.
I believe in miracles. Sometimes I thought, there are no miracles. Yeah, there are, and this is a big one.
Follow The Letter at theletterpodcast.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
And welcome to Project Recovery, a podcast about addiction, but more importantly, it's a podcast about recovery. I'm Casey Scott. This is my co-host, Dr. Matt. How are you today, man?
I'm doing great. How are you?
You seem a little bummed.
Well, to be honest, I am a little bummed out. I had a big backpacking / horseback riding trip planned starting tomorrow up in Wyoming. And, you know, my kids are going to go, and my brother and his kids and my dad. We were really excited about this. And this particular area of the Wind Rivers is under still 3 or 4 feet of snow.
Mother Nature's messing with you?
Yeah, so kind of bummed about that. But otherwise, doing well. I'm going to keep those days off, though.
Yeah. What does Dr. Matt look like on a horse?
Sore, probably.
How long would the horse ride be?
It's going to be, when we do it, we're going to do it in August. It'll be an all-day thing to get us up to where we need to go, probably 7-8 hours on the horses.
Wow.
Yeah. And then they're going to drop us off, and we'll fish and hike around and be lazy.
You know I like to play games here on Project Recovery.
Yeah?
Let's play a game real quick.
Okay.
We've got a room about 5 people in here, okay?
Okay.
Raise your hand if you just got off probation.
All right.
You did too? Yeah. All right. Isn't that a great feeling?
That's awesome.
Yeah. So I go in because every morning a lot of people want to know, what it's looking like for me after recovery.
Yep.
And so every morning I wake up and I've got to call this number.
Brown.
Brown is my color.
Right.
Brown is my color.
Right.
And so if it says brown, then I have to go in and have to take a UA.
Yep.
And that's a P test.
It is.
You don't have to study for it.
How far back do you have to stand? Do you get more points if you're back farther? And
You know what? That's no. There's not a little bullseye on there.
Oh, there isn't?
But that
would make it more fun.
Yeah, but I don't think they want to make it fun. But that's a weird deal.
Yeah, I bet.
Having to go in there and
Well, I think one of the things, and I haven't been in that position, but one of the things, it's a loss of your own personal freedoms. Now you're forced to go in and do something, and you've handled it pretty well, and all of our guests that we've talked to have handled it well. But it's kind of a loss of personal freedom. That's hard.
Yeah, and so every morning I would call and I'd say, "Please don't brown, please don't be brown, please don't be brown."
Yeah.
And if it was brown, then I'd have to take an Uber there.
Yep.
And then I used to think that I could pee on command, but the older I am now, the less likely I can do it on command.
Well, that actually is kind of pee anxiety is a thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a guy in the room with you.
Right.
And you got to,
You're looking over your shoulder and you're like, come on.
Yeah.
Come on.
I'm doing the pep talk, come on.
So you're off probation. You don't have to do that anymore?
No, I don't have to do that anymore.
Nice.
So that was a big day. And in recovery, you do celebrate these little achievements. Because before you know it, as soon as you get out of recovery and you look at all the stuff that you let go by the wayside, and now you've got to attack this, it seems like monstrous. It seems like there's no way I'm going to be able to do it. But it's just like eating an elephant, one bite at a time.
One bite at a time.
And so you relish those little victories.
Well, and does it make you feel? Does that add to your motivation? Like you've gotten a little reward now, you've achieved being off probation, does that make you feel motivated to keep going?
It definitely motivates me,
Yeah.
and it lets me know that I'm on the right path.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, congrats, man.
Yeah, so I'm pretty stoked about that, but I'm even more stoked about our guest today.
Yes.
This is Brandon Allan. Now, I found Brandon Allan because once you get out of recovery, and, like I did, I started my road to recovery at the Pinnacle Recovery Center. And so when I got out, I never thought that I'd be in this world. But since I'm here,
Right.
let's make some noise. That's my new philosophy. I want to start a conversation. I want to bring it to the forefront. I don't want to have backroom conversations about addiction, and that's why we started this podcast.
Which is so unlike your normal personality.
I know, right?
Right.
And so on Facebook has been just a great resource, and there's a Facebook group page that's called Addicted We Stand.
Right. It's a great page.
And that's Brandon Allan. And Brandon Allan, we're going to get to that a little later in the podcast. But let's find about how your road to addiction began. So, Brandon, tell us a little bit about your story, if you don't mind.
Yeah. So I guess my story would start when I was younger. My mother passed away when I was just about 8 years old. I went through a lot with her. She had breast cancer, and she fought that. They did the mastectomy, and then went back in about 8 months later and found that the cancer had moved to her bone marrow, and she had passed away within about 3 months. I had a really hard time dealing with that growing up. I had a really hard time accepting the culture around here, the religion, and even God, because I was an angry child because of that. I think that's realistically what pushed me into starting to use. I started to use marijuana when I was in junior high and about 13 years old, and that was kind of my go-to for about a year. So my major addiction, I guess, started with my pain pills. When I was about 14, 15, I had a lot of pain in my back. I was super active, played baseball, ran track, and I'd come home from my games and my practices, and I'd be really sore, and I'd hurt really bad, more than most kids. And so we started going to doctors, and after about a year, we finally got the right answers. And I have just genetically, my spine twists as it comes up, kind of like scoliosis, but it also corkscrews a little. Everything's kind of shifted. So my muscle structure is really weak. My bone structure is really weak back there. And so I started with, really easy stuff like the non-narcotic pain pills and muscle relaxers. When I was 17, I got into a baseball injury. I got kneed in the back really hard, and I'd actually lost feeling in my legs for a while. My disc had pinched off my nerves, and it ended everything for me.
So what was the right answer? The right answers were they diagnosed you with a pain problem?
Yeah, so I have basically at that time I just had scoliosis, and I can't remember the technical name for the other disorder, but it just caused me a lot of pain because everything was really off.
And the doctors were trying to help.
Yeah,
but so they're the ones that you got that prescription legally as a teenager.
Oh, for sure.
Right?
Yeah. When I was, I think I was 16 or 17 when I first got my first opiate painkillers.
Yeah.
And I was on fentanyl for a while.
Now, what is fentanyl?
So, fentanyl is it's a very strong opioid. It's usually delivered in a patch form. I think that goes for 72 hours, and it just feeds opiates into your body for that long.
It's
and it's
used
very
for chronic pain,
right? Like
issues.
Cancer patients.
So yeah, people who are really struggling. So just the fact that was prescribed to you tells me that this was a really serious issue and a chronic one.
Yeah, and it just, from that injury, everything escalated. Because my back got weaker and weaker because it was already injured. They wanted to do surgery. At the time, the success rate of that wasn't worth doing it, right? And so we moved forward, and I just dealt with the pain with pain pills for a very long time.
So without surgery as an option, the only other option was deal with pain and take pain pills.
Right.
And so how long do you think you were dancing with pain pills before it became a full-blown addiction?
I actually, it was probably about 2 years. I had moved down to St. George after high school, and I remember the first time I had ran out of my prescription early and started to feel those withdrawal symptoms.
Now let me ask you this. When you were taking your pain pills, were you taking them as recommended, or did you feel like at any point you started to use them more than?
Yeah, for sure. And that's kind of what led up to. When I ran out of them, I had started to use them more. I had started to use them in different ways. Started to snort them, and then learned I could smoke them off of tinfoil. It became a full blown addiction. When I was about.
How did you? You're taking these legally, orally, right? How did you learn about snorting and smoking these pills? Where did that knowledge come from?
So just from friends. I had friends that I continuously smoked weed with through high school and stuff, and they graduated to pain pills. They bumped up and then they kept going just like I did.
Yeah.
But it's
And I asked that question kind of knowing the answer. I
Right.
mean, that's usually how that happens is people start, using, experimenting, partying with these things, and that knowledge of how to take them differently. What was the difference for you, if you recall? But if you took them orally the way they're prescribed versus snorting or smoking, what did that do for you?
It was that quick instant gratification. You take the pill and you get relief or you get the euphoria. 30 minutes or
so it went from something that was helping control pain to now you're using it for what would you say?
For everything. I mean, I'd use it to feel better. I'd use it to feel worse. I'd celebrate with it. I'd mourn with it when my friends would pass away. It was everything. It was. I mean, at least for me, it became an everyday thing. My best friend.
Did you have any idea at the time that you were dancing with the devil? You know what I mean? Did you think that this was normal?
I remember. No, I didn't think it was normal. I knew that I was kind of dancing in a dangerous area. I remember my older brother had said to me one time, though, he's like, dude, the people you're associating with are the people that are going to get you in trouble. He says the drugs you're doing are going to turn your friends into enemies and your enemies into friends. And that's when I kind of realized how bad it was, because I had lost a good group of friends and I was now hanging out with people that I normally wouldn't associate with,
And so you moved down to St. George, you ran out of pills, and what does that look like? How do you get your fix?
I remember I tried to call my doctor and get more, and he told me you need to schedule a visit, come and see me, and so I talked to friends that had them, and I found them down there. I mean, St. George is, there was a lot of pain pills down there, a lot.
What years are these?
This was 2004 and 2005 is when I was down there. Yeah.
I wonder if I know we're kind of down in St. George in your story, but I wonder
Yeah.
if we could go back just for a second.
For sure.
I think something that's really important, and I think a lot of people would relate to, is we're talking about the opiates being this big addiction, which they were and are for so many people. But you had mentioned, and we kind of jumped past kind of the pain of losing your mom and starting to smoke weed in junior high school. I don't know. Could you talk a little bit about what led you to smoking that early, and do you feel like that had anything to do with the ease into jumping into pills?
Was it a gateway?
I can't. For me, no. It wasn't because I didn't start using the pills because of the people I was hanging out with. I started using pills because I had an injury.
Because of that.
Weed.
But why did you start smoking weed so young?
I think a lot of reasons. I think rebellion was one because I like I said earlier, I was so angry at the world. I was a mama's boy and I didn't understand it. I didn't get what had happened. She died 7 days after my 8th birthday. And it was hard. It wasn't an easy thing to go through, And so
what kind of support did you have? You mentioned you had an older brother. How did he handle that?
He handled it in his way. He's very quiet about it. He doesn't talk about it. We're very different, I'm very vocal. I want to talk about things. If it's he sits on it.
He internalizes it.
Well, and he still. Not to air my brother's laundry, but he has a problem like I do as well. He drinks a lot, and it's something that he's got to come to grips with.
I often say in addiction, it is my addiction and my recovery, and everybody deals with it different.
Right.
And we're kind of talking about Brandon's story and what led you down your road to addiction.
And I appreciate you, Brandon, sharing that. The reason I ask, and I can tell it's a raw subject. Losing your mom at such a young age is an awful thing for anyone to go through, but so impactful. And I think so many people that struggle with addictions in various ways throughout their life we talk about being predisposed to addictions through biology, but I think we can also be predisposed to addictions through emotional trauma. And there's so many people, it may not be necessarily the loss of a loved one, family member, but it's something. And that often sets us up to want to escape the reality of the anger or sadness that we're feeling. And I appreciate, Brandon. I know that's hard to talk about, but appreciate you talking about that today.
Yeah, no problem.
You're listening to Project Recovery. We'll be back in a few seconds. So you're down in St. George. You found a way to score pills. When did you see your life start spiraling out of control?
So while I was down there, I had gone hiking through. This is where it all started. I was hiking through the Narrows in Zions with about 13 of my friends, just a bunch of hippies smoking weed and going through the canyon. In the middle of the night, like 2 in the morning, we were all partying. A forest ranger came up and busted me for smoking weed on Zions National Park. Well, I was trying to be that really good friend. I was like, oh, I'll take the charge. You know, I have all the weed. Nobody else has weed. Well, I didn't understand that it was a federal charge. And that put me on federal probation where I had a U.S. Marshal for a PO for 3 years.
They don't mess around, do they?
They don't mess around. I mean, he was actually really decent to me. And I did about 8 years straight of probation. I did federal and state.
I'm naive. I mean, I just got off probation, but I don't know. What is the difference between a federal probation and a state probation? Is one more harsh or?
I actually, for me personally, the state probation was a little bit more intense and harsh because of what my crime was to my PO. He was dealing with a lot more than just a kid that was smoking pot in the canyon. And so, you know, I drug tested once a week. I had to go to the federal court building once every 3 months, I believe. But it wasn't bad. But the reason I brought that up is at that point in time, I no longer could smoke weed. Weed was something I used to cope with a lot. It was something that helped me a lot with, at least I thought, you know. It helped with my pain. It helped cope with my mom. Well, as soon as I got put on probation, I could no longer smoke weed. But I could take my pills, and I could take
because you had a prescription.
Right, I could do a dirty UA for opiates all day long, and I could get away with it.
So you feel like your pain pill use increased because the lack of marijuana?
Rapidly, yeah. I mean, it was something that that's pretty much when it became more recreational and more of a something that I depended on a lot. You know, I was doing it all day long.
And so, how long did that last for?
It lasted until I got a little back injury at work. I think I tore my muscles in my lower back, and I couldn't work. And I ended up losing my job and my insurance over it, and that's when I lost my prescription. And so I had been selling a couple of my pills to one of my buddies at the time, and we'd kind of been bouncing back and forth with drugs, and he had introduced me to heroin at that time, smoking it, and that's I started smoking heroin. I did that for about 1.5 years.
Do you remember the first time you smoked heroin?
Yeah.
And what kind of feelings?
I fell in love almost, you know. In a way, it was. So for me, I had taken pills so long, and you know, I'd built up a dependency on them, and built up a tolerance. And then it was like the first time I had smoked heroin, it was so much less than I was spending on pills. It was so much less than I was investing my time. It was cheaper, and it was.
It's kind of this pattern. You lose marijuana, the pills take center stage. You lose insurance, and the pills become harder to get, and then heroin becomes kind of the main drug. Is that kind of the progression?
For sure, yeah.
And it seems to be a natural progression for a lot of the people's story that come on this podcast is that, you know, they were introduced to it through, a doctor's office. Right. Then they end up abusing them, and then when they can't get them, they go to heroin. Why is it? Because heroin is cheaper?
Oh, it's a lot cheaper, yeah. Yeah, it's a lot cheaper, and it's more readily available, you know? I mean, prescription pills have to come from a pharmacy. Heroin's coming across the border like crazy, you know? I mean, it's a lot more accessible.
And so you smoke heroin for, you said, what was it, about 1.5 years?
Yeah, roughly, I'd say.
And how, I mean, was it daily?
Oh, yeah. I mean, morning, noon, and night, for sure, at least. And
how do you pay for that?
I mean, that's how I got on probation. I mean, I did some terrible things, man. I mean, I'm glad I'm where I'm at in my recovery right now because I can definitely openly talk about it. But I'd stolen from family. I'd stolen guns from my dad. I stole money from my brother. I had even stolen from my nephew.
Things you're not proud of, but
no, it's not. It's nothing I'm proud of at all. But it's real. It's real. I made decisions when I was in my addiction that I would have never made outside of that. You know,
the disease has hold of you.
Very much so. Yeah. I mean, it's just like what my brother said. It turned my friends into enemies and my enemies into friends. And I did terrible things to get it. Yeah.
Did you at any point remember that advice from your brother while you were in the process of that, or was that kind of dawned on you later?
He would remind me probably every time I went to jail. He would remind me for sure. Yeah.
Like a big brother does.
Yeah,
right? He's all over you about it.
Yeah.
Now, when we first,
but I mean,
met,
did you accept that? Did you reject it? Sorry,
no,
Keith.
I didn't. I don't think I cared at that time. You know, I didn't care about friends. I was the type of addict. I was very. I would seclude. I would isolate. You know, I wanted to do my drugs by myself. I didn't want to hang out. I just would go and get my drugs and do them.
And I think that's kind of the common story is people start doing things they never would have done.
Right.
They start hanging around with people that they never would have hung around with. And the only thing that becomes important, and I kind of like your phraseology, even though it's sad, is you fell in love with heroin. And I think that's kind of the story we're hearing from a lot of people is that becomes the love, that becomes the focus, and everything else just isn't important.
Right. It's almost like a romance. You just it's nothing else matters at that point. You know.
You know, first off, I want to say thank you for being so honest and real, because I want to take the listeners on kind of a journey of what happened today. We met you guys down in the lobby, you and Rachel, and you were so gregarious and smiling and happy. And as we get into your story, your body language is changing a little bit. You're remembering some of the stuff, and I know that's really tough. And I think it's so important to share our stories because I think people will see similarities in there and be able to relate to the stories and maybe kind of put it on their life and kind of get some hope out of it. But this is not fun for you to talk about, is it?
Well, it's not fun, but I'm very open to always talk about it. You know, it's something that we've realized on our page that if nobody's talking about it, nothing's going to change. You know, and so if I have to feel the things I have to feel to help somebody, yeah, all day long. You know,
and I appreciate you doing that. So you said you'd gone to jail a couple of times. How many times have you been in jail?
I think I'm not one of the type of people that count, but over 10. You know, I've probably spent roughly 2 to 2.5 years locked up in my life.
And so, you know, a lot of times when we're doing this podcast, Dr. Matt, we will talk about someone's rock bottom. I've detailed my rock bottom. We've heard Brandon Novak's rock bottom, Court McGee's. Do you know your rock bottom?
Yeah. I think I know where I hit mine for sure.
Do you mind sharing with us?
No, that's fine. So, I in 2015 I was using pretty hard and I was running for my PO. I mean, I got really lucky. They had like switched my PO in the middle of something, so I had like 2 months where I didn't have to report. So naturally, as a drug addict, I took that and ran with it. You know. Well,
summer vacation.
Yeah, exactly, and it was. And at the end of the 2 months, the 2 months didn't end. I just kept going. And I remember I had gotten into a really bad car wreck. I got in my car, and I don't remember this whole day. I was using heroin and Xanax that day. And I don't remember the night actually beforehand. I'd gotten in my car and I only made it about a mile from my house. And I was doing about 50 miles an hour on this road in Spanish Fork, and I had rear-ended a parked car that was for sale on the side of the road, and I had pushed it into another parked car. So I totaled 3 cars, and I did a whole lot of damage to myself. And luckily, I didn't hurt anybody outside of myself, right? But I remember that out of that whole day, they put me up in the ambulance, and I guess I had called my brother or something, and he had gotten a hold of my father, and because I lived with my dad at the time. He had driven down the mile to come and see what was going on. And I remember seeing my dad in the back of the ambulance. That's something that will stick in my mind until I die. You know, that's a really hard thing. And just the disappointment that he had in his face was something that
But you had to have seen disappointment from family members prior to this.
Oh, for sure. And this was hard though, and this led up to, that car wreck and all of that had led up to, well, they were recommending prison for me, and luckily I got a program called Drug Court, and it did wonders for me, right? I started going to anonymous groups, meetings, and I started making connections and friends with people in the recovery community. But my rock bottom actually was in Drug Court. I had relapsed, and they wanted to put me in jail. I didn't want to go to jail, so I went on a bender again. And I remember I was up here in Salt Lake. I had just scored.
But see, I think that talks about the state of your mind right there.
Right.
I don't want to go to jail, so to prove it, I'm going to go out on a bender.
Right, exactly. Yeah. I may have gone. They were probably going to give me like a weekend in jail, and I was like, no, I'm not doing that. Like, no.
Just a weekend.
Right, and I didn't want to go do that. I'd been doing good for like 9 months, and then all of a sudden I had to admit that I relapsed and go through that process. Mm-hmm. And so instead of facing it, I ran. And I remember I was, I had turned off my phone. My family had put up things on Facebook, like they were looking for me. I was gone. I was off on a run. And I remember I'd gone into a Dunkin' Donuts bathroom, and I had a decent amount of heroin. And at this point, I had graduated, like we say sometimes, and I started shooting up. I remember I tried to shoot up in this Dunkin' Donuts bathroom enough to kill myself. I was done. I didn't want to fake anymore, and I did it. And this is kind of graphic, but I had done it, and
so attempted suicide.
Attempted suicide with a needle, with a needle full of heroin, and it didn't do anything. I barely got high, and at that point I couldn't even just end it. I was so done, and I ended up getting picked up, but I had never had thoughts like that before. With as much depression and anxiety and things I'd gone through growing up, I never thought about suicide. It was never an option for me, and so that was hard. I didn't want to. That's something I haven't admitted that to a lot of people.
What do you think the difference was? Why that time? Why did you become suicidal that time?
I just think I had realized that I didn't have a light at the end of the tunnel, man. I didn't know that I could get out of this stuff. You know what I mean? I didn't know that there was recovery.
I think sometimes people will go through, you go through these cycles of using and not using, and sometimes there's kind of a pre-conscious awareness that I'm in a cycle that I can't get out of, and the term I would use is hopelessness. You're saying I don't have a light at the end of the tunnel. That's that hopeless feeling where a person starts to realize, maybe not fully consciously yet, but they start to realize I'm not in control anymore. This is in control of my life, and I'm never going to feel back in control of my own life. And that, once that hopelessness for the future sets in, escaping that, sometimes suicidal thinking creeps into a brain that had never thought about it before.
I can see where you're going with this. Well, maybe I can't, but I know in my addiction, and I've often said it, that I was very good at lying to myself.
Yes.
I was amazing. I mean, I was lying to myself, and I would believe these lies. Mm-hmm. But there came a point where I wasn't even believing the lies,
Right.
And I just go, I'm not buying what I'm selling anymore, and I'm a dang good salesman.
That's a crisis, right?
Yeah.
That's a crisis when you can't buy your own lies anymore.
Yeah, and maybe that's where you found yourself, is that, that for whatever reason, you just didn't see a way out.
Yeah, no, I didn't, and then there was no light at that point, and I think that what that did for me was made me look for other options. I think I had realized that maybe I hadn't expanded and looked for something that might work for me. I'd gone down the route that everybody else was going, and that wasn't working.
And I think a lot of times when people are going into these recovery centers or going to drug court, it's begrudgingly. It's
under, you're being forced, right?
Yeah.
Right.
And like I've said, don't listen to this podcast if you think it's going to fix you, because it's going to tell you there's options out there, but only
Right.
you can fix you. And we saw that with Court McGee, we saw that with Brandon Novak, we saw that with so many people that says, until it was my idea,
Right.
I couldn't get on board, and it sounded like you were ready to make it your idea.
Right, exactly. It was time to try something different, take control, and see if I could fix this.
So what did you do different?
My major thing was reaching out to people. I had such a hard time with, I guess, ego or pride that admitting that I was struggling to people that would help me was the hardest thing. That was the key, reaching out. And because of drug court and things, I had the opportunity to start being of service and doing community service and things like that.
So were you going to, did you do a recovery center? Have you done NA, 12-step? I mean, did you try all of those things?
Yeah. So the only treatment center the only treatment center I've ever gone to was a state-funded treatment center in Utah County. I did about 40 days there, inpatient. And yeah, I got a lot out of it. There's things they did, different therapies that helped me work through the trauma with my mom and things like that. And there's definitely a piece there that helped. But yeah, then I did NA and did the 12 steps. I had a sponsor. I still call him, even though I don't really, do a whole lot of the 12 steps and meetings anymore, but it's definitely something that played a huge part in my recovery for sure.